All right, good morning. It's 9:30, and I'm happy to call to order public meeting number 106 of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. Chairman Crosby is out today on vacation, a well-deserved vacation, so the four of us will proceed with the day's business. The first component of which is the minutes of two meetings, January 22 and January 23. Both are in the book, and I would deal with them seriatim as we usually do. So I'd ask if there are any comments about the meeting, about the minutes for January 22nd, which was the presentation by Mohegan Sun and Wynn, Massachusetts.
No comment. Move to approve the minutes of January 22nd.
Second. Second for that? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
And the aye. And the ayes have it unanimously. Then the January 23 minutes combine both the presentation by Blue Tarp Redevelopment and the Commission's business meeting that followed that presentation. So are there any comments about the contents of those minutes?
Yeah. Move to approve the January 23rd meeting minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And the motion is carried unanimously. That brings us to the second item on the agenda, which is the legal division. Has several matters, or at least one. So I'll turn it over to General Counsel Blue.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You have in your package today what we're referring to as the omnibus suitability decision. And the purpose of that decision is to put in one place all of the individuals and entities that have been found suitable through all of the suitability hearings that we've held. It is in draft form. It is for your review. We have checked the list against the decisions, but would like the opportunity to check it one more time. Once the decision is entered, the goal would be to allow the licensing division to use that as reference as they are approached for licensings by employees or particular entities or other vendors.
We have built into the regulations that if you've been qualified and if you then apply for certain kinds of gaming licenses, you start with an update from the qualification. And so that this is an important part of
That's correct.
Facilitating that process. All right. Anything else?
No, it takes the same form as our other suitability decisions. It is just limited to, it's specific to this use, and it contains all the entities and individuals. So if it meets with the Commission's approval, we will put it in final form and we'll circulate it for Commission signature.
All right. Any comments or discussion about that?
No.
Nope. I think it's a good approach, and I think it's a job well done, too.
We've usually done these, just for those who are familiar with this, we've done the suitability decisions in writing, following deliberations, as we're permitted to do. But this alerts everybody to the fact that we're doing this. There's a complete list of all the qualifiers here, and this is a public record of that. So I'd take a motion, I think, to approve this document as it currently exists, and then we can sign it and have it promulgated if there's a motion and it passes.
Yeah. I move that the omnibus suitability decision, as prepared by the legal staff, be approved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. There's another item on the agenda. Ms. Blue, are we going to deal with that one this morning?
Yes, this is the monitoring and pre-opening regulations. They are not in your package, but what we do have is a draft of these regs. These are the regulations that would detail the kinds of activities and reporting that licensees have to provide to the Commission between the time of the award of the license and the time that the facility actually opens. So they're they're in a format that we've discussed before, more high level, sort of general. What we will do is we will circulate them to the commissioners after this meeting. We will put them in the package for the 20th. But this is the very first initial draft, so there's a lot of discussion and conversation that we'll have about them until we get them into a format where we're ready to put them through the process. So we should have those to you by the end of this week, and then they will be in the package on the 20th of February.
All right.
Do any of these regulations intend to allow for monitoring after the opening of operations, or it's purely for the period of after award and prior to opening?
It's all pre-opening at this point. We will have to have monitoring regs for after the opening as well.
Will we have time to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of those regulations would deal with the construction period through and up to the opening, so that won't start for at least 30 days.
A little while. A little
Month.
A month.
A month.
You know, Commissioner Zuniga, I think the point that you mentioned is appropriate, because there are we will have a full set of regulations that will deal with internal controls and machine specifications and all the different regulatory requirements we have to have. But there are some specifics that will probably need to go forward from the monitoring process. So I think it is important as we move forward, we'll look to make sure we bring those along with the rest of the process.
Do we anticipate that we might have to issue these regulations in an emergency basis if we can find ourselves 30 days from now having to think about that?
We may want to consider that. I think it depends on how quickly we arrive at a draft that we want to move through that process. So a lot of that, I think, will depend on the discussion we have next week. But if we need to, we can certainly consider doing it on an emergency basis.
Okay.
The discussion we have in 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions or thoughts, comments about that aspect of things? All right, thank you very much, Ms. Blue. That brings us to item 4 on the agenda, Administration, Executive Director Day.
Thank you very much, Commissioner McHugh. And I could have made a mistake, but I think when I was listening to the news weather forecast last night, it said something about this year we're already at about double the amount of snow that Boston usually receives. And I probably have the actual statistic wrong, but I think the point of the forecast was it's been a pretty good winter so far.
Yes, it has been. We had before you arrived, we had snow deeper than Robert Parish was tall one year. So we're in much better shape this year than that. So.
Anyway, I appreciate the experience. You know, I'm glad to have the opportunity. The weather's been enjoyable.
Spoken from someone from Montana.
Yes, yes.
Trying to make you feel at home.
At any rate, I had a couple items I wanted to know, just a general update. And of course, the commission knows we were able to pull off our first quarterly all-staff meeting, which helped to keep our whole unit informed. We anticipate doing that every quarter as we move forward. We have selected candidates for our human resources business partner, or human resource assistant, and accounts payable fiscal specialist. So we've got those two candidates we've selected, and we'll be putting them through the background. We've also got about 9 other recruitments in process. Has to do with a desktop support person. We've got assistant directors for IAB unit, both in financial investigations and, of course, our gaming agent units, along with some other positions that we're moving forward with. We're also I've been working on developing and preparing information for the 2 legislative proposals that the commission approved to move forward with. One to do with the extension to repeal the pari-mutuel and simulcast statutes, and the other dealing with the gaming winnings withholding tax. We also did receive and are reviewing 4 responses for the RFR project for monitoring services. So we anticipate first glances 4 very good proposals, and we anticipate making a decision, I think, around the 1st of next month. Final decision and recommendation to the commission.
That's the monitoring for the construction and of the licensees.
That's correct.
Right.
So the regulations that we're talking about, and
Right.
of course, our timing, we really do want at some point to have input from the successful contract group
Right.
on those regulations. So I think
Right.
we'll be able to bring those two things together.
Right. Great.
Thank you. And the next item is the Internet Gaming Forum. And as I think as the Commission is aware, the Commission has been planning to hold a public forum. This should be under, well, actually, it should have got, it was tab 4B, but we did provide, I think, an updated version as well, with just a couple minor changes. We were planning to hold a public forum to discuss internet gaming. Commissioner McHugh is providing the lead on the forum, and I've been assisting him. As Commissioner McHugh has described, we are planning the program because within weeks, the Commission will be issuing the single slots license permitted by the expanded gaming legislation and 2 of the 3 authorized casinos a few months after that. In that context, we think that it would be helpful to have a public discussion about internet gaming. And I need to emphasize not to advocate or propose its implementation or how it should be implemented, but to simply acquaint public with the existence and the potential impact on the lottery and the brick and mortar facilities that we will have been licensing at this point. We'll have a number of speakers from other jurisdictions, as well as some from Massachusetts. The topics are what are the internet gaming and social gaming, and demonstration and discussion of internet games in comparison to social gaming. So the idea is to establish a basic familiarity for folks about exactly what we're talking about and do some discussion about what social gaming is. Because as this discussion moves forward, there's always a lot of discussion about social gaming and how it may or may not impact actual gaming providers. So it'll be good to have that difference. Then there'll be a discussion about the status of internet gaming nationally and around the world, plus a discussion about the legal status of internet gaming in Massachusetts itself. Sort of to, again, form that groundwork understanding. Risk to the internet gambling, money laundering, problem gambling, and verification, geo-verification in particular, will be a topic that we'll discuss with the panel. Then challenges and successes of internet gaming in Nevada, Delaware, and Canadian provinces. So we anticipate a real interesting discussion there as that group has either established a form of internet gaming or is in the process of doing so. So it will be, I think, helpful for us. And then the Massachusetts Lottery will be talking to us, and the topic is assuring continued success for a $1 billion asset in a changing environment. And then we hope to conclude, or plan to include, with a discussion entitled Lottery, Internet Gaming, and Casinos, Peaceful Coexistence. So we've had a great response to our request to come and speak to us, and we know for sure that that schedule is going to be full, and looking forward to the discussion. We anticipate we may have a few minor changes in the document that we have distributed to you, but we would, and some shifting in presenters, but we are recommending approval of that agenda. Thank you. Commissioner McHugh, did you have anything?
Thank you for, we've been working together on this, and I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be highly informative. One thing that's not on there, and I just note that, and we'll note that at the beginning of the program itself, and is the kind of gaming or kind of game playing that doesn't look anything like casinos. There's monetized versions of various other kinds of games out there, and we're not going to cover that. I read, though, the other day in, maybe you saw it, a sort of War of the Worlds game that exists. And in this game, people can build spaceships, and they've got laser beams, and you can go shoot other spaceships. And you can either do that, build your spaceship by getting money inside the game, or you can pay real money to somebody who's got a spaceship and buy that person's spaceship. And apparently, about 2 weeks ago, there was a battle in this game that involved 4,000 people across the world who had paid a total of $340,000 for the various spaceships. and all but one of the spaceships was blown up, eviscerating, vaporizing 330 of the $340,000. So there's a world out there that's not regulated by us, that we're not going to regulate, that we're not going to talk about in this forum. But it might be worthwhile. I don't want to plan another forum, but it might be worthwhile sometime down the road to think about that piece. In England, I know, and maybe in some other European countries, and maybe James Kilsby, who's going to speak here, can talk to us a little bit about that, regulation of that kind of gaming is also being proposed, because when you think about the amount of money that's involved there and the potential for mischief, it's a fascinating topic. But we're not going to get into that. I just thought I'd throw that out as a little addition. But we'll define what social gaming is and what the parameters of social gaming are as we begin to talk about it.
Was there a monetary reward for that one spaceship that
No.
eviscerated?
No.
It was just the act of playing the game.
Well, I think the victor had now either had the $340,000 or only had the original 10 and the rest was just gone. It didn't exist anymore. There was no value for that money that had been invested.
Right, because as soon as you get something in return, that
Right.
could be deemed
And it's
gambling.
yeah.
If you
Except
can- if you-
it's maybe a game of skill as opposed to a game of chance. I mean, that's,
Right.
yeah. So, I mean, this is a huge diversion, but, you know, it's going to be a short meeting, so it's a space filler, right?
I think we need a field
And it's
trip.
interesting, right?
Need a field trip or an actual setup to see how
That's
this
right.
works.
Yeah.
One issue that I was looking for in the agenda, and I thought it would be under verification, which I guess now is more about location verification, is age verification and making sure that there aren't underage players participating in this.
That's a gap that we have right now. We'll try and fill that gap with somebody from one of the invited people who has some knowledge of that. I think we'll be able to fill that gap. But you're right, that is another piece of this. It's a little bit easier piece, I think, and less complicated than the geolocation stuff. But you're right, we ought to cover that.
Well, I had a chance to chat with Mr. Martino the other day, and he mentioned that he's looking forward to coming up and being part of the panel in the afternoon. So looking forward to it.
Very, that's the director in Maryland, very thoughtful guy and person. We're looking forward to having him and all the others as well.
And it is an interesting area, because it goes with the identity verification, so we may be able to bring that in with some of the speakers we've got lined up.
Right.
But it's getting more, what would the word be, sophisticated with each development of the internet. And I know the providers have the ability to go out and verify different sources of identifications that are just available public as well, to be able to check on what your age is and whether you really are the person. In the end, of course, it's virtual, so lower the risk, but being able to actually for sure insure it is difficult, will remain difficult. But I had Commissioner McHugh, the concept of the spaceship battle. It'll be interesting to see how those various games make it or not to the actual gaming floor at some point in some form.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised as we look forward to how
Right.
the industry develops to see some of that change.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. There are a lot of slot machines now that have games as those kinds of games as part of the that you can play as part of the reward for hitting a certain sequence of slots, and it's not too far to take it to that next level. Be really interesting. There is, as a final word, not a fair amount, there's significant legislative interest in this topic. And so we're reaching out to legislators to invite them to come. And I anticipate that there will be some in attendance, and that's a group that we would like to have participate in and think about this topic as we move forward as well. So I think it'll serve that function very well. All right, do we need to have a vote or an affirmation that this is a good agenda?
I think that would be appropriate, yes.
Okay. So, is there a motion to approve this agenda with such tinkering as is inevitable between now and then?
Move to approve the Internet Gaming Forum final agenda, subject to additional tinkering as presented in the packet.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it unanimously. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioners. If we could move to the next topic that I've got this morning, which I think is under tab 4C. The Commissioners saw these two items before. I believe it was on the 29th of January. And at that point, we had quite a bit of discussion, and we took them back, and we made a number of changes. And what this is two documents, really. First one is a outline of the planned schedule for the licensing and award process for the Category 2 the slots license at the end of this month. And then the other document is really a template for the commissioners to use in preparing their reports and binders for presentation during that period. What I'd like to do is just review the outline, if I might, the process outline, and comment on a few of the changes or items that were clarified as the discussion began. First, on the left-hand side under timing, you will see the schedule is to begin Tuesday, February 25th. Previously, we had been talking about it on Monday, the 24th, but plan now to actually begin that on Tuesday, the 25th. Each commissioner shall prepare a binder which documents the review, and each commissioner can elect to rate all, some, or none of the questions. That was a clarification, and then a further clarification that criteria shall be rated with an overall provisional rating for the category and each applicant. Copy of the binders will be released prior to each commissioner's report. On day one, we move that up, and we will have that information will include an outline of the related law. We had that later on in the process. We thought it makes more sense to get that information up before we actually begin the presentations. The reports will begin on Tuesday, February 25th with Commissioner McHugh with Building and Site Design, followed by Commissioner Zuniga with Finance, Commissioner Cameron with Mitigation, Commissioner Stebbins, Economic Development, and Chairman Crosby, overview of the project. On day two, what we anticipate, we just really simplified it and said on day two, we are anticipating the reports and discussion will continue, and with an award date on the fourth day, which would be the end of the week, the 28th. That's anticipated, and then the final clarification would be that the process I've outlined may conclude earlier, depending on the discussions, progress of the discussions and deliberations. Is there any further question that, or are we appropriately captured what the Commission is planning at this point?
I have one question, and that is, I thought that at some point we had discussed the possibility or the desirability of making a decision subject to the conditions unique to the applicant. In other words, we'll have a set of standard conditions. Those are out for comment now. But there will be some conditions, perhaps not many, that are applicable only to the specific applicant. And making a award subject to those conditions and allowing a short period of time for response to make sure that the applicant both understands and accepts those conditions, and then making the final decision. Or not making the final decision, but confirming the decision that we made. The award, yep. Or making a slight adjustment if it were necessary to meet some reasonable concern that the applicant had.
Correct. That's my understanding as well, and that's really has a lot to do with the flexibility at the end of the process, so the Commission can kind of move forward as you get to your decision. I think we've also talked about the possibility of making a decision effective on the 28th. So we don't have that particularly in the line. because it's kind of hard to determine which direction you might have to go when you get there.
Okay.
We can add it though if you.
Well, my only concern is that if we do that and have promulgated this without some kind of an advisory narrative, somebody might say we're not doing what we plan to do. And I think the risks of that are small. I think they're maybe inconsequential, but it may be worthwhile to put at least a footnote in here saying that that's what we intend to do. I don't know whether what do others think about that?
Yeah, well, that was my understanding as well from what we discussed last meeting.
Right.
And with the understanding that there could be no additional conditions,
Right.
applicant-specific,
Right.
or that those conditions would be such that they could be accepted right away.
Right.
So the period of turnaround between the decision and the award could be negligible,
Right.
or not, obviously.
Right.
So I think we should emphasize that with a footnote at least and make it clear.
That we build in some amount of time and a short amount of time, because we want to
Yeah.
do this, but enough time to work through any last-minute little wrinkles that might pop up.
So the award is based on the acceptance of the conditions by the applicant.
Right.
Or understanding,
Or-
acknowledging.
Or yes, well, I think an acceptance, we'd have to have an understanding that these were the conditions. But, it is conceivable that in creating a condition, we might have overlooked something, right? That was reasonable for the applicant to say, I really can't do that, or I can do that, but it would work a lot better if I did it this way, or something like that. They could come back to us within that very short period of time, and we could have a discussion as to whether we wanted to modify that condition, and then once that was done, confirm the award. That discussion would go on between staff and the applicant, not between us and the applicant. And it wouldn't it would just be a discussion about the terms of the condition.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does.
If it will work, we can make that addition maybe even in brackets on the day 1, day 2, right under continuation of commission reports.
Sure. As long as it's in there someplace to say that that's what we're contemplating, and then when we do it, nobody will be caught by surprise.
Well, I've got the notes on kind of the thoughts we're talking about. I'll consult with Ms. Blue and we'll come up with something to insert there.
Undoubtedly. Right.
Anything else?
The way this outline is laid out gives us maximum flexibility, which is great. However, I was thinking about the length that I'm still trying to figure out just how long it's going to take us, my group, to present the finance section. What level of discussion it might entail. I hope it's a good one and a healthy one, and et cetera. But would it be better for us to generally stipulate that the first day will include maybe up to 2 presentations from 2 teams, let's say, and then the next 2 or 3 are for the day after, and hence, and if we finish before the day is gone, then we can all go back to think about it and think about those presentations, et cetera. Or do we want to, or are we really thinking that we may be done with all the presentations on day 1, which is what this outline suggests could happen?
Well, we built it ultimately for that maximum flexibility because we've had a lot of discussions about how long the reports might take. I think probably the prevailing thought is more likely something like building and site design would take the morning finance part of the afternoon. The commission have discussion, probably break. I think part of the conversation has been it may get a little bit what would the word be? Aggressive might be, but if, it depends on how long the commissioners, you know, want to present and listen to reports during that period. May need a break to think about it and come back and take it on the next day. So because of the topic variability and the different complexity of each of the topics, we thought it would be hard to actually predict and look like it was a restriction for the commissioners. They could take that time that they felt necessary. Fellow commissioners could discuss as they wanted to and ask questions, and then you could move on. So you could move on as fast as that process, you were comfortable with that process and wouldn't be hindered by any particular restrictions one way or the other than by Friday.
Well,
That's what the thought, but you know, we can make that change if you would like us to. We should.
I like the flexibility. I think it should move at the speed that's appropriate. We may have 2 done in the morning and start the 3rd one that same day, but I do like the ability to just move it according to, you know, how fast the conversations proceed, and we can't predict that.
yeah, the only thing we can predict is how long each of our presentations will
Yes.
last. And I mean, we certainly could do that to the extent that it was helpful once the presentations are made, just give people a heads up, and we could fine-tune the schedule based somewhat on that, although we don't know how long the discussion is going to take of the presentations. So I think the maximum flexibility would be the best. In that regard, though, why, I know we've talked about this before, but why are we starting Tuesday instead of Monday? I'm thinking about what you said, and I'm also thinking about putting in some space for the applicant to think about, if necessary, may not be necessary, but again, thinking about flexibility, but think about the individual conditions and get back to us. It wouldn't be more than, we wouldn't allow more than 24 hours for that, and it might happen in 5 minutes, but so that really is a question. Why are we starting on Tuesday?
The thought process there was general idea that probably the reports would take 2 days.
Right.
It was a reasonable explanation. And then from there, that would still allow flexibility for the consultation we're talking about. And the thought process would still have 1 full day, and then the commissioners would be ready to make the award on the final day. I think there was a lot of discussion about taking the entire 5 days and how to make sure that time was filled to get to the decision.
I know I originally had concerns about how long this would take, and Tuesday should be enough time, but another thought, and I know it was Commissioner McHugh that said, look, if we arrive at a decision on Thursday, there would be no issue announcing the decision, but yet it wouldn't be effective until Friday, which would cover us. So with that added bit of information, I don't know that it actually matters if we started Monday or Tuesday, because say, for example, we were able to get through in 3 days, and I'm not saying that would be the case, but with the ability to say not effective until Friday, I think that, for me anyway, that solves the issue of really getting to a decision and not being able to announce it until Friday, which I thought was somewhat problematic. But with the ability to say, here's the decision, not effective until Friday.
Thank you, Commissioner Cameron. And the other thing that I think has become would make that not starting to Tuesday helpful, though, would be the concept of there's a plan that the commissioners will share each other's binders, so to allow that process of reviewing it, and that additional day may actually save time in the schedule at the end to provide. So we actually don't know how that will work out, how the reports will all be ready, and when they will be in and when they will be available for review.
That makes sense.
Well, let's just test this to make sure. It makes sense to me too, but let's just test it. Suppose we go through this schedule, and on Friday at 1 o'clock, we finally come to a decision. It's an engaged process, and we first come to a decision Friday at 1 o'clock. And we say X is the chosen applicant, subject to conditions A, B, C, and D, specific to X. What do we do then? We want to allow X time to think about those and get back to us. Maybe X does it like that. X will undoubtedly be in the room. We could take an hour break and see if X has any problems, but maybe X does have a problem that is a legitimate problem and would take a little time to work out between staff and X. How do we, under this schedule and that scenario, how do we deal with that? Allow the weekend to pass and then come back? I mean, it's unlikely, and that's always a possibility.
Well, and it could, Commissioner McHugh, I think that possibility could happen regardless of how many days that you end up. Even if there's 5 days, if the commissioners aren't able to get the decision till the end of the process, you're still going to have that problem. But you are, as you're making the decision, or would make the decision, award subject to the conditions, acceptance of the conditions. It seems like to me that process could take place, and once the licensee would have to comply, so it could come back early that next week. But at least the decision's been made.
Okay. Everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, totally fine.
Okay.
I want to go back to the issue that we talk about with, especially as it would relate to specific conditions, and this notion of the applicant and the staff maybe being able to go off and work something out. I'm a little hesitant about that, and maybe it's just devil's in the details, but I mean, we've always conducted ourselves in an open and transparent process, and to have at some point that conversation or discussion come back and be between the applicant and the commission, I think is healthy, as opposed to, you know, we turn off the mics, the audio is muted, and we come back and everybody's, you know, just holding hands and saying this is great and we're ready to go forward. Seeing what give and take is behind that review and acceptance of specific conditions, I think is healthy to have at some point back in front of the 5 of us. But again, maybe it's the devil in the details of how that gets, and the mechanics of that. But
Well, I think if there were any modifications, it would have to come before us.
okay.
And if
that's
not,
what I
then
expected.
it would be exactly what we...
That's why I just don't want that lost. That
No, I agree with Commissioner Cameron, and I think the point is essential. But it'd be, so what would happen would be the staff and the applicant would talk about the applicant's concerns and possible solutions to the concerns in an advisory capacity. Then we'd have the same discussion in public.
okay.
I mean, if we made up our mind that we wanted condition X, I would really want to have a dialogue with the applicant as to why condition X wasn't acceptable and why the other one is preferable.
Okay. That was my assumption, but I wanted to be clear.
No, I think that's essential to be clear.
So in the end, the applicant comes before the commission.
Right. To report, we accept with this modification, and we say the modification is fine, now we're done.
Or the modification is not, and we do it back again.
Or that's right. Or we move on, yeah, right.
Yes.
Okay,
We'll work that into the outline just so it's there.
great.
Any other changes
To the outline?
to the outline?
No.
That brings me to the template.
So I'm sorry. We concluded that we will start on Tuesday.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Let me just make a couple general comments. Report template follows the evaluation report and award process outline. For the most part, the template is blank, so that's quite a bit different than the last draft you saw. It does have example criteria and questions from one of the areas, one of the categories, just to demonstrate what that might appear like. The report sections are introduction, overall provisional rating, criteria rating, review detail, and appendix. behind that portion, so on pages 5 and 6, you will find the provisional rating form is included, and a criteria rating sheet is just provide that template for the commissioners. So most of these documents have some bold writing, but are for the most part blank, pending each of you to fill them in. But hopefully they are adaptable at this point. And I think the big question, one of the questions is the concept of questions, and the decision is up to the commissioners as to whether or not to rate each one of the questions on this portion. We thought probably having those questions in the report would be helpful informational-wise for the rest of the commissioners, but not necessarily, there is not necessarily a plan that the commissioners will actually rate each question. It will be up to the commission.
Is that last comment, Mr. Day, directed at the question list on page 3? In other words, we list all the questions there just to show everybody what the questions were, but yes, we would not necessarily rate each question.
Yes, Commissioner McHugh, that's the idea.
Okay.
Still have the list of them there, but
okay.
But not necessarily a rating. That would be up to each preference of the commissioners.
And the idea is to do a crosswalk between the questions and the criteria and its ratings. Is that a fair statement?
That's my understanding. Yes.
In my case, which fits the template just fine, there are questions that will appear in several criteria because we gleaned information, for example, financial information, to answer and rate a couple of different aspects, financial strength as well as projected cash flows, for example, which is fine. It's just questions will appear under our criteria a couple of different times. Just as a, which, you know.
And
sure.
You also notice that under the provisional, on page 5, the overall provisional rating, there's an introductory section, and that has a short description. This description describes the approach to review and weighing the criteria, and so I think that is some of the concept as to how the commissioners are approached, and whether some of the questions were just a yes or no, not considered, whether there's some combination of those questions and those kind of things. I think that's part of the idea of that section.
Yep.
All right. Any comments or thoughts, questions about that? There's flexibility here for everybody within a essentially standardized template format.
Yep.
Template, yeah.
If that, we'll make those changes we discussed, and then we'll be ready to go.
Great.
Excellent.
All right. I don't think we need a vote for that. We've got consensus. This is a work in progress. We're just going to take the next step in its evolution, but this is essentially how we're going to proceed with that rating process. Okay. Next item then, Director Day.
The next item, I'd like to suggest that the Commission, I think will help for purposes of discussion, if we might want to review item E, the cost assessment regulation draft first, and combine item D with that discussion as appropriate. They relate to each other, and I think some of the facts or some of the proposals in the regulation itself may stimulate some further discussion about the whole ballot initiative issue.
All right.
If that would be acceptable, I'll go forward in that process. The regulation that's proposed is under 4E, tab 4E, and there's a red strikeout version, and then there's a clean copy for ability to read the entire regulation. The Commission has previously considered much of the language that's proposed. They also requested public comment on much of the language, and we are now proposing an amendment to an existing regulation, 205 CMR 121. We recommend or add we amend or add sections to the regulation, including assessment fees, fiscal year, annual budget, and reconciliation. We will have one assessment process, and the proportional sharing will be based on approved positions. I'd like to note a few sections, and as I move forward, just to comment on them, and I assume the commissioners will either stop me as we go or wait till we get to the end and come back and provide what corrections or input that you need at that point. I'd like to start right with section 121.01. You might note that the staff is recommending that the amendment strike the term non-refundable. And essentially, just real briefly, these are not, as we looked at it, don't seem to be specifically provided for in statute, and may actually send the wrong message as we move forward through the end of the process in issuing the licenses. I might add too, as we go forward, just a note to have it out there generally, is staff is going to recommend that this move forward as a emergency regulation, and I will call on my fellow counterpart over here, Catherine, to talk about that as soon as we get to the end of this part of the presentation. So back to the regulation. The basic fees have not changed, the same thought, and that's as we move forward in section, actually past section 2 into section 3, $600 per slot. The annual assessment and the Public Health Trust Fund are basically still here. As we go through the language, you will note that the fees are proportional to the number of approved or projected gaming positions. And also, if you move to the end of section 3, there's a little D, and that adds any other fees amended and required by the Commission to provide as much flexibility. And as we continue to talk about this regulation, I want to touch back on that term of flexibility again. As we redrafted this regulation, given all the everything that's going on relative to the awards issuance, the license, and who's ultimately going to receive them, we attempted to make this regulation as flexible as possible to anticipate situations that may occur and still provide for a steady stream of funding for the Commission. If you quickly go to 121.02, payment of fees, the Commission may provide that the license fees, and those are the fees that are $25 million, $85 million, be paid on an installment basis. Goes on, clarifies slot fees will be assessed on July 1. Clarifies that the annual assessment will begin in 2015 and is based on the difference between projected revenues, and Commission may allow payment in more than one installments there as well. Would begin the Public Health Trust Fund with fiscal year 2016. As you move forward, in the event, it also clarifies the enforcement action for failure to pay down in section 7. And in 121.03 establishes the Commission fiscal year as July 1 through June 30th. Then provides for the development and approval of the Commission's annual budget based on cost, revenue, and estimates sharing. It also, in paragraph 1, go back to the appropriate number, in 121.04, Commission annual budget, paragraph 1, it includes cost as amounts necessary to make transfers pursuant to section 93, chapter 194, to make sure the Commission has ability to include in its cost for its budget repayment of any funds in that case. It provides for quarterly monitoring of the budget. If the Commission determines projected costs will exceed projected revenue, the Commission may revise the original estimates. And in the end, in 121.05, provides for a reconciliation process with the appropriate bill, credit, or refund at the Commission's discretion. In summary, the regulation describes the budget and funding process the Commission will use as well as we move forward. As the Commission is preparing to make a licensing decision around the end of February, remaining time, our opinion does not allow for the usual regulation development and approval process, and our request is the regulation be enacted as an emergency regulation. With that, if I could quickly defer to Catherine to address the emergency regulation process.
We think that implementing this on an emergency basis meets two main considerations. The first being that we are coming up on an award of a license, so we want to have this in place. The second is that we are starting our first budget process, and in order to get that budget completed by the beginning of the next fiscal year, we will need to start that fairly quickly. This regulation spells out how we're going to do that, and so we think it's important to have it on the record and to let applicants and other folks know how we're going to do that. What we would do is, on an emergency basis, if it's approved by the Commission, it'll be filed with the Secretary of the Commonwealth. It'll go into effect then. But we will also start the regular approval process at the same time. So we'll get the letter out to the local government advisory committee. We will schedule the public hearing. We'll post it for comments, do all the normal things we do for regulations in a concurrent basis.
So the emergency and the regulatory process would go forward in tandem?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Kathy,
Okay.
the emergency reg is valid, there's 90 days, is that correct?
Yes, the emergency regulation is valid for 90 days.
Right.
That also gets us through almost the end of what will be our budget process.
Right, right. All right. Comments? Are you ready for comments?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I picked up on your thought about providing maximum flexibility for what we do. It's, I have full anticipation that we're going to move forward and issue the license, and things will go forward in ordinary fashion without any difficulties. But there are a lot of balls in the air, and so I wonder if I could raise a couple of suggestions. The first is with respect to 121.021 on page 2. And that says, as a condition of any award, the Commission may provide such license fees be paid on an installment basis. And the statute requires that those fees be paid within 30 days. Our regulations require that too. I think the flexibility of an installment basis is a very helpful thing. But it seems to me we ought to add to that an installment basis before the license is issued. So in effect, it would be a layaway approach to that. I don't anticipate we would need to do that, but it would give us the flexibility if some unexpected thing occurred to do that. And get a license fee in installments and credit that fee to the overall fee that was owed to us, and then recoup the amount necessary, strike there. So I'll just end right there. That would give us that flexibility. And I think it would be a very useful tool to have in our toolkit if necessary, if we did that.
So in other words, and I think it's a very good idea, but just to confirm, the installments could be made until the final award of the license,
Right.
at which point we are then under the statute of
Right.
everything is payable 30 days
In
after.
30 days, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. I think
As I
it's-
say, I don't anticipate that would be something we'd want to adopt, but it would be something we would have available in the event we did want to adopt.
So a simple sentence at the end of that paragraph, like you suggested, until the final award of the license, would
Sure,
suffice.
until the final award of the license, or paid on an installment basis before the license is finally issued.
yeah.
That would
it's-
allow,
yes.
in effect, the designation of a person, entity, and a commencement of collecting the license fee on an installment basis at some point, either at the end of the installment period or at some point sooner. The final license would actually be issued, and within 30 days of that, the balance of the unpaid would be due, or if the installments ate up the entire license fee, the license would issue when the entire installment had been paid.
And then the life of the license begins at that point, right? The 5
Yes.
years and the 15 years can
Right.
only begin until
Right.
that point. I think it's very reasonable.
And we determine what the installments are.
Right.
And
That's the key.
set out an installment schedule and the like. Again, I don't anticipate we would do this, but it's there if we have to do it, or find it desirable to do it. So that's the first thing. Is there any, Commissioner Stebbins, any thoughts about that, or Commissioner Cameron?
Mr. Lennon, does that sound appropriate?
It makes sense to me. The one thing that I've always been concerned with is our cash run-out date. So as long as we determine our installments and we determine the amount that's due that doesn't leave us with no lights on, I'm fine with it.
Right. And that's what we're talking about. We anticipate, as I said, things going forward in ordinary fashion. But the last 2 years have demonstrated that sometimes they don't. So this would be a helpful thing to ensure more flexibility. The second suggestion that I have is designed to achieve the same end, and that is this. 121.023 talks about commencement of the assessment process in 2015, fiscal year 2015. I understand that. But what about commencing, at least having the ability to commence an assessment process once the license is issued, either provisionally or permanently, to deal with the rest of FY 2014. And we could do that by easily, I think, by amending this component of the regulation slightly to say that we could have, if we chose to do so, an assessment process for the end of maybe the last quarter of fiscal year 14 to provide us with a flow of cash if we needed to go in that route and had no other source for it. And we would not have to rewrite this section significantly. We could say, for example, at the beginning of that subsection, something along the lines of, except in the case of any assessment for fiscal year 2014, and that would take care of that first part. And then in the second to last sentence, say, the Commission may assess an annual assessment on a pro rata basis commencing with fiscal year 2014 and will make full assessments for each fiscal year thereafter. And then we build in the kind of flexibility we may need, may not need, but at least we built in another flexible approach to a cash flow.
I agree. I agree with that.
We've actually discussed this quite a bit, and it brings us back to the initial plan that we had laid out for FY14, and the fairness issue that was brought up by the Category 2 applicants, right, of how we'd make sure that we bring in enough money until the Category 1 applicants. But I think combined with your first piece of an installment plan, I think that would mitigate our cash flow issues. So yes, I find that to be a good alternative as well.
Okay. Those letters we got, those thoughtful letters we got dealing with the fairness piece, I think we've all taken to heart, we've read, and the implementation of these would take into account the substance of what those applicants said.
And it doesn't, Commissioner Mayhew, it doesn't foreclose an option if it's necessary. I think it provides that option.
Right, right.
And that makes sense.
And then the final suggestion I'd have is a purely technical one based on the other changes, and that would be to amend subsection 5 of 02 to delete the exception, to delete the clause that says except those required by 205 CMR 1.021 and 2. Because if we do an installment plan, we would want to issue invoices and get paid within 30 days. And if, as anticipated, as I continue to say that, if as fully anticipated, the applicant gives us the full fee on the day we award the license, we issue the invoice, and the full amount is due 30 days thereafter. In fact, I think that's what we're going to do. But
Yes.
But in either case, we could issue an invoice, and it would be due 30 days thereafter. The payment would be due 30 days thereafter.
I agree. I agree.
Now, there may be other things that we need to do or think about to deal with, to give us some maximum amount of flexibility. But this, it seems to me, builds in the most flexibility that we can build in ourselves without help from others outside the commission. So we may need to get that help. We may not need to get it, but at least we've done everything we can to create as much flexibility as is possible within the ambit of our authority. Any further discussion on that, Commissioner Stebbins?
I had just two quick comments or questions. Under 121.04, the Commission's annual budget, knowing that we're kind of backing out days of when an invoice and assessment needs to go out, I would like to see us kind of hold our own feet to the fire and create a deadline for when we would need to approve an annual budget.
We talked about that and putting that in the reg. I think that, you know, every year the budget process is slightly different, so we could put a date in there, but the idea was to have flexibility if we can do it sooner and have it done, you know, quicker in the more time before the beginning of the fiscal year. That's great, but there have been some fiscal years in other organizations I've been in where you're right up against, you know, the end of the fiscal year to do that. So that's why we don't have a hard and fast date in there, but we can certainly add one if you'd like.
Well, and the concept was just for, and Derek can jump in here if I'm describing it wrong, but the concept was basically that we'd start development and try and get it before the commission in April. To essentially, there is a period that we have, the licensees have 30 days to pay the assessment. So that does put the pressure on us to get it to them. So they've got the 30 days to pay before we start the new fiscal year. So there is that requirement to serve as both a protection, but also a requirement on us to get those bills out.
Okay. I mean, again, just thinking that we know we need to back days out from the beginning of the fiscal year, if we could give ourselves somewhat of a timeline, even if it's not a hard and fast date, even some guideline by which Derek will be here for a while, but which future commissions can begin to keep a time frame.
Perhaps we could say something to the effect of, you know, prior to the beginning of the fiscal year, the commission can or may begin the budget process as outlined here. I think it's implicitly there, but
yeah, I think that's there, but just a suggestion. I think it's our intention.
It is our
to actually
intention.
develop a procedure behind this that would outline who's doing what and what those time frames are, and that procedure would begin in identified to begin in April. So if the commission would entertain that we could accomplish that, I think it would be helpful to still commit us, but also maintain flexibility.
Okay.
And I don't know if it'd be helpful if you'd want to just put a budget calendar in here, that we'll present a budget calendar by a certain date. We've talked about that too. So then it requires us to do a planning process, submit something to you by April that says we'll have a completed budget in front of you.
And that would be in the procedure as well.
Yeah,
Right.
that would definitely be part of the procedure.
right.
Okay.
Because I like deadlines too. I like to have them clearly laid out.
Right.
That way you stick
Right.
to them. And
Right.
No, that's good.
The other question I had, or the other concern I have under 121.04, subsection 3, if at any time during the fiscal year, I know we've obviously used the word flexibility a lot this morning, but I have somewhat an issue with that. You know, kind of this broad authority that we would be granted to go out and assess additional costs if at such time we think our costs are going to exceed revenue. I'd like to kind of narrow it down for both our benefit of, again, holding our feet to the fire when it comes to operating within our means, and secondly, to give our licensees some level of comfort in terms of when they may expect an additional assessment. I know we're looking for flexibility, but I think for everybody's planning purposes, to all of a sudden, 2 months into a fiscal year, I'm not saying this would happen, but 2 months into a fiscal year, here's another assessment. I think for people's planning purposes, I have an issue with that. I'd rather say, something, going into the third or fourth quarter, as opposed to, I would find it highly unlikely that we start running up against some issues somewhere in the middle of the second quarter of the fiscal year. But.
Well, there's a couple of things that run against that concern, which is a very legitimate one. We're not going to have a lot of money in our coffers as a matter of course. We're not going to, in my opinion, assess a large amount and then draw down and have a healthy balance in our bank account to deal with contingencies like an unexpected plan, but unexpected amount larger than the budgeted. So our operation is one in which there's an incentive to be as efficient as possible, where this flexibility is very important. I can go back to our investigatory process and our own consultants, who we liked very much, and they did a great job. The forecasts that they gave us ended up being surpassed for every applicant. And had we not had such a flexibility of midway through the year assessing for additional costs, our ability to conduct the investigations in the time and manner that needed to happen would have been seriously hampered. So I am a proponent of leaving it the way it is. I think those concerns are very valid, but we are not in a steady state of operations. We have, in my opinion, we will see costs that we may have thought about but not realized until they materialize. We're still building an organization, so I think for those reasons, I think we should just leave the way it is.
How the steady state piece is of concern to me too. We're moving through this, and we plan, and most of our plans work out. But you pointed to one place where the expenditures were way above what was predicted. But Commissioner Stebbins' point is a sound one too. What about if we put a couple of fiscal years in here, which would take us into a steady state, and then require us either to renew the authority with a new regulation in 2 years, or not? If at any time, for example, we said at any time during fiscal year 2014, 15, or 16.
Yeah. Or
some other way to.
I find agreement, and I hear Commissioner Zuniga's concern. We are in this still in steady state, but even just adding on to the end of that, beginning with fiscal year 2017, 2018, whatever we think is reasonable, the Commission will be allowed to assess additional costs, no earlier than the beginning of the third quarter, whatever the language should be. But I like the idea of kind of getting through this this initial period, and then at some date in the future, just saying beginning in a certain fiscal year, we won't be able to do it until second quarter, third quarter. Am I picking up on your point, or did I just muff that one?
No. That's another way to do it. I guess my suggestion was tighter. There'd be no ability to assess additional costs under my formulation after we finished fiscal year 16, unless we renewed the authorization of this regulation and require us to do it. Between now and then, we could do it depending on what happened. But yours is another way of doing it, saying we're going to limit ourselves to increases in the third quarter beginning in fiscal year 17. I guess the difference is mine would be tighter, yours would be more flexible. But I think the point of some kind of a limitation in there is a good one. What?
Well, I think the reason to begin with was because we are not in a steady state. So funding is not as it will be once we are in a steady state. So limiting it in some way, making a statement that we intend to use this only for the next couple of years, let's say, I think is not, we can do that, I believe. And maybe we should be as firm about it as Commissioner McHugh suggests and say, hey, these are, you know, we need this right now, but we would have to reauthorize later and really make the case. I always point to Director Lennon because he knows so much more about finance than I do.
Well, go ahead.
I like the idea of ultimate flexibility. I do like being on the other end of it at times. I like the idea of having expectations of when someone may tap into me for some more money, so maybe we can write a policy around how much time we can give notice, the process going up to the commission to let you know what the cost increases are, whether you agree with them, whether you want us to look internally for the budget. I don't so much like the idea of always sticking to a one-time assessment, just because things will come up now and then, where if we stick to a one-time cost assessment, it'll be up to us to always find it within our own hide if we have a cost come up that we didn't foresee. In every operation, when they get into steady state, has something thrown at them that they didn't foresee. And we don't have the ability to go out and raise our fees. We don't have the ability to, the only place we generate revenue is through our assessments. If we had that ability to make those different determinations, I'd say, yeah, that's fine, and we'll.
All right.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I alluded to in my previous comment, which is we cannot go into spending to the negative, which is another constraint for us. There is vague language in the statute that imagines our ability to borrow in the future. It's not very clear to me that we'll be doing a lot of that, or how we will go about doing that, so that to that point, it really leaves our ability to assess our licensees as the main source. So I'm advocating again, maximum flexibility. The other, but since we're talking about ways in which to confine this authority, we could also think about a percentage limit. The budget could be revised a maximum of 20% at any given point, giving ourselves flexibility to make those assessments. It would give a licensee, planning idea that not expecting to have assessments exceed a certain amount. But I'm in general of the opinion that these regulations should stay like this for certainly for these few years.
Commissioner Zuniga, Commissioners, I am arguing for leaving the flexibility that's in the regulation at this point. I would agree with both Mr. Lennon and Commissioner Zuniga, but the other part I think is important is what the industry that we are regulating is very aggressive, very adaptive and changes quickly. So I think one of the reasons for this kind of flexibility is to be able to also accommodate those changes. If the industry is going to make some changes, maybe it requires us to be able to purchase some new equipment and or put on some more staff to be able to approve new concepts and new ideas. To the extent we freeze our ability in this regulation to be able to make those assessments, to be able to accommodate that service to the industry, I think we'd be at cross purposes. So for that extent, I would encourage, I understand, but I would encourage that we leave the flexibility in there and develop our processes very public. The commission does here say we'll report and monitor that, the budget and the progress on a quarterly basis. So I would argue there's not going to be any mystery about what happens in that process or where the assessment would come from. It would be clearly evident as we move forward in that budget process and that projection. So I think that kind of protection is there. I clearly understand the concept of getting a budget, doing your best to stick to it, which is I think what the design is here. But I'd suggest that relief valve has other purposes just besides our flexibility. I think it helps us respond to the industry as we move forward with this development as well.
That's an excellent point, and thank you for that. And let's not forget that any cost, any budget revisions, in excess of the approved budget would have to come to the commission anyway. So there's a real, check there for, the public knowledge, for the input of this commission to come in and say, maybe I disagree with, maybe this excess assessment is too much or it's too soon, et cetera. So, anyway.
Yeah, I think I'm coming around to that view. The point about the industry's flexibility is a really important one. This is a very flexible, creative industry, and the kinds of games and the kinds of things that we may need to regulate, the equipment we may need to do it, the training we may need to undergo it could happen very quickly and may not be accounted for in our budget. And we'll just have to, we could simply undertake to self-monitor, recognizing that it hurts the licensees as well if we come out of nowhere with a huge budget increase that reflects poor planning as opposed to unexpected contingencies. Commissioner Stebbins, you're.
The wish of the commission, I'm happy to leave it the way it is now. I mean, hopefully, as we do get our feet underneath us at some point, I think there's a need for both the commission and our licensees to have that. I think we'll see how it works itself out, but I'm comfortable with leaving the flexibility for the time being.
Well, I think this is a good conversation to put in front of the applicants and ourselves, the issue, and I think there's consensus around the issue that we should not, cannot simply be sloppy in budget planning and then make it up at the end to take care of oversight. So, not that that was the plan, but okay.
We definitely understand that process.
Okay, anything further then? Comments from anybody about this part, about the regulation? All right, we do need a motion for this one, right?
Correct.
And the motion would be to approve the regulation as presented to the commission today with the amendments to 121.02, 121.023, 121.025 that were discussed during the dialogue, during the conversation and discussion we just concluded. Would that be the right motion?
Excuse me, Commissioner, you did say as an emergency.
As an emergency regulation. I did not say it, but now I have.
Thank you.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. The ayes have it unanimously. All right, thank you for this thoughtful work.
Thank you.
And that brings us then to the to the next item, which is 4D. And 4D, the ballot initiative, I think that we have, we're all aware of the fact that it's out there. It may raise some concerns, some contingencies. What we need to do is to create an atmosphere and an environment where we move forward to fill the mandate of the statute and our obligation to implement the statute as steadily and quickly as possible. And the discussion that we just had, the motion we just made, gives us some tools to use if necessary to do that. There may be other tools that we need. We may need help from others, but at the moment, this is as far as we can go to keep this thing, keep this process online, moving forward, while other things over which we have no control sort themselves out. I didn't mean to take this away, but if there's anything further you want to add to that, or we should be discussing, Director Day, let's do it.
No, and I think that was one of the big reasons to move the regulation forward, is to ensure that the regulation would provide flexibility to adapt to items beyond the commissioner's control. And I think the approved regulation does that. So from my perspective, I think the message even in the reg is that we're moving forward to make the assessments for the licensees to pay the bills, and that's the concept.
All right. Any other thoughts on that topic?
Well, no, just to emphasize your point that we're implementing the statute that we have, and for the purposes that we were appointed, we're continuing to do our job, and our staff is helping us do that. So forward and onward, as you say.
Till somebody tells us different.
Right.
Look forward to the end of the month.
Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very exciting. We are weeks away now from making the first of the really big decisions, and things are shaping up to have an interesting and vibrant, I think, discussion that final week, and it'll be very exciting to see what the outcome is. So I think we're all enthused about that.
Coming to the commission was my first big decision, so this will be the second.
The second big decision. All right, anything further?
I have nothing further.
All right. Any of the commissioners? All right, that was a succinct meeting. So we would have a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, and we're in adjournment.